Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Strategy Session. Tonight, Stuart, Joe, and I are joined by Mario Nicolais, brilliant lawyer, a guy who has a deep insight of American election law and American legal challenges. He was the lead attorney on the case that tried to disqualify Trump under the 14th Amendment, which in any sensible universe the Supreme Court would have agreed with. But we do not live in a sensible universe. We live in the Muskverse these days. And so we are in a moment where, as I said earlier today, if you're curious whether or not you're in a constitutional crisis, you're in a constitutional crisis. So with that, I want to welcome Mario to the show. And I want to welcome, as always, Joe and Stuart. My different camera tonight, folks, so the colors are a little weird, and I feel like everything is reflecting. So I may go buck naked without the glasses for a bit.
Two of us.
Anyway, guys, welcome to the show. I want to start with you, Mario, because we've talked a lot about the current constitutional crisis that we're in and about just how serious this will be if Trump, even though he said today he would listen to the courts, just how serious this will be if Trump defies court orders. And I wanted to ask you a question after you answered that. I have another follow-up on that front.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, just thank you for having me on. I did litigate with a great team. I was a member of the team that litigated, trying to keep him off the ballot. And ironically enough, the Supreme Court was really worried about chaos if they didn't keep him off the ballot. At the point in time, we told them, you know what, this is the anti-chaos mechanism. If you want chaos, just wait till Donald Trump takes office again. And 3 weeks in, I think I was telling someone earlier today, I'm like 3 weeks in, 201 more to go. But that's, if he leaves office. That's if he actually pays attention to the Constitution, which I think we're talking about right now. I think that's one of the two big questions are, one, what does the U.S. Supreme Court do?
Right.
Eventually. And then two, what does Donald Trump do? I think the only reason right now he's saying, oh, I'll do what they say is because he's banking on the U.S. Supreme Court backing him again. And if you rewind 1 year, we had actually just argued this, the 14th Amendment challenge 1 year ago. Seemed more like about a century ago, but it was only a year ago. And we were still waiting on the immunity decision. Those two twin cases did more to affect what's happening right now than any two cases I can think of in American history affecting a presidency. They basically told Donald Trump to do whatever he wanted and to do so with impunity, and he's doing it. And that's what you're seeing right now. Now, the issue is that we do have lower courts with backbone, with spine, who are standing up and saying, look, this is the rule of law. We're standing for the rule of law. And frankly, our Constitution is teetering on their bravery. And the fact that the Supreme Court might actually, look around and find some semblance of, stiffness in their back and try to at least hunch over a little bit.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that's what he's saying. It's really interesting, but if you watch what he said today, he said, "No, I'm not going to challenge the courts. I'm going to do what the courts say, and I'm going to but we're going to appeal. We're going to appeal. We're going to appeal." And all they're doing is slowing us up. That's all these court cases are doing, slowing us up. That says to me, and then I like what you think. That says to me, he kind of like is we're going to appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court. That slows us up. But when we get to the Supreme Court, we're going to be able to do what we want. I mean, that's the message I got. I don't know if you heard it the same way. I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, I think that's right, Joe. I think that's right. I think that's what he's saying is we're going to appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court because I think the Supreme Court's going to go my way, just like it did last March, just like it did in June when it issued the immunity decision. He thinks he's going to go. He thinks he's going to go 3 for 3, and so he thinks they're going to side with him. And so he's going to say, "Oh, I'll listen to them for right now." The question is, what happens if they don't? What happens if they do come down? What happens if Chief Justice Roberts says, "You know what? We have to protect. If we don't do our job, then checks and balances have been thrown out the window. We are in a autocracy at this point. If he says we're going to stop this, what happens? And I think you wind up in a situation where and it's apocryphal. It's not actual, but where you had President Andrew Jackson, who said,
Right.
John Marshall wrote his opinion. Now let's see him enforce it. I could see Trump basically saying, okay, well, you wrote your opinion, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to follow it. And that's when we're at a constitutional crisis, because what happens when someone just refuses, when a president of the United States refuses to abide by the United States Supreme Court finding? I don't know.
So let me ask a question of that, and I'll let you jump in after this, Stuart. So let's say the court, any of these courts, find their spine. Yes, they're going to appeal all of the Supreme Court. But if it's a matter of an Article 1 or Article 2 question that is black letter constitutional separation of powers, or if it is birthright citizenship or whatever it is, and they say to Donald Trump, thou may not do this, you got to do that. And Trump says, screw yourself, not going to do it. What would the procedure be for the court to try to enforce that ruling? Do they like when they say, okay, you're in contempt or whatever, how would that be enforced? Is it the Marshal Service? Is it DOJ? Because I have real doubts DOJ will obey even lawful orders from the court.
That's the problem that you find yourself in. I mean, they can find him in contempt, but again, who's going to enforce that contempt? The DOJ? Pam Bondi? I mean, kidding? So I mean, that's the dilemma that you find yourself in. And furthermore, I think the Supreme Court could find themselves hoisted by their own petard. He's going to say it was part of my official duties. I'm immune from this. Good luck. And the problem that we then have is that the court is really our last bastion here, because the other check would be he doesn't do what the court says, so he gets impeached in the House and then he gets removed by the U.S. Senate. Well, who has faith in Congress doing their part to check Donald Trump? I think that's the true constitutional crisis. Is we have at least one chamber or one branch of the government that has abdicated its duties in Congress, and we have another that even if it finds its spine, might not be able to do anything about it. That's why we'd be in a constitutional crisis, and it'd be this is the path that we do find autocrats and dictators taking. And typically they go through this process, and they grab onto democratic processes, they use it for their own ends, and they take power. I mean, that's what we're seeing right now.
Stuart, jump in.
Yeah, no, as a Southerner, this sort of harkens back to Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court ordered integration. There was a sort of infamous exchange between Earl Long, Huey Long's younger brother, who was quite a character. If you haven't read A.J. Liebling's book, The Earl of Louisiana, it's one of the great political books of all time. Exchange that he had with a guy named Leander Perez, who was adamant segregationist. And Perez said that they would refuse to abide by federal court orders. And Earl Long came back and said in his great, I won't try to do an imitation of his great Louisiana voice, said, well, that's great, Leander, but what are you going to do now that the feds have the nuke? And it was sort of predicated on that. But look, it didn't take the nukes. It took National Guard troops when Eisenhower sent them. It took National Guard troops when they sent them to Ole Miss. Ole Miss had 30,000 National Guard troops after the riots when they tried to stop the integration of Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, it took more than that, Stuart. Most people know there's Brown versus Board of Education. They don't know that because of the lack of enforcement, you had Brown versus Board of Education 8 years later. I think it was 8 years later. So you had to go through all the way again because it wasn't being enforced. And I mean, that's one of the difficulties of our judicial system. It takes quite a bit of time. It takes a lot of moving forward. And people who hoard power do this. And I think I've talked to a couple of you before about this, but I liken it to Robert Moses, who from New York, and And, Donald Trump is a New York developer. He's going to know who Robert Moses is. And for the viewers out there who don't, there's a great book called The Power Broker by Robert Caro about him. And it's all about a guy who basically took over agencies. And his motto was, if you put a shovel in the ground, they can't bring him a lawsuit fast enough to stop you. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's putting shovel after shovel after shovel into the ground and saying, you can't stop all of it.
But that's the whole thing
is
disrupt, delay, all the slowness of the court system and the appeals. Every one of these things is something that just puts sands in the gears and slows him down and gets us closer to 2026, where we might be able to have some victories in the House. I mean, this is the only way, I think. I mean, I don't know, again, Mario, what you think, but I mean, it's not necessarily whether any of these suits actually win out once they get to the Supreme Court, but if it takes 18 months, 2 years to get there, and the election's getting closer, it's about disruption, delay. A lot of the tactics, frankly, that they were doing to Biden and his agenda, but now it's really important, I think.
I think one of the questions, I think it's a very good question, Joe, because that the clock is running. There will at some point, it may be later in the game, but at some point survival mechanisms will start to kick in. We're starting to hear some back chatter about all these cuts. Katie Britt from Alabama realized that the University of Alabama is the largest employer in the state and that Elon Musk is about to blow out roughly a third of their overall budget by canceling all these grants and all these research projects and all these, National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health grants, education grants, all these things. That's rippling out into the states now, and people are noticing and are starting to sort of poke their heads up and say, "Hey, not my cuts, not my cuts." Although I did get some intel about a member of Congress was asked. A Republican member of Congress was asked yesterday. Several were asked. One of them replied to the reporter and I who were talking about it. They said, our district is incredibly dependent on these universities, and all these grants are going away. What are you going to do about it? And he said, nothing. I'm not going to defy Elon. I'm not going to defy Trump. That tells you that as representatives of the people, they are checked the hell out. So I think I wonder. I mean, weirdly, I think the court has a simple test here, Mario. Maybe I'm wrong because I'm not a lawyer, but the simple test seems to me to be: do the separation of powers matter? Does Article 1 and Article 2 matter? Does the appropriation and authorization of federal funds matter? Or can the executive just flip off a switch willy-nilly? And I know the Impoundment Act was sort of a talking point a few days ago. Where do you think that question, that specific question on separation of powers and on, because I think if the Supreme Court says, no, Donald, you can't stop previously authorized federal programs, pass a bill and stop them, it's a whole different fight.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First, I think Joe was right. It is about a lot of delay. Because I talked about Congress had advocated itself. I should correct on this. As long as Republicans are in control of Congress, they're abdicating. I think yes. Democrats take back the House in 2026, and we're talking a whole different story. As far as the separation of powers, I would hope that the Supreme Court, I would hope their survival mechanism kicks in and says, look, we see ourselves as kings of our own fiefdoms. And we understand that that's under threat right now. We need to make sure that we protect those checks and balances that we think that we have our own. They see themselves as legitimately equal power to the president. Mm-hmm. These Supreme Court justices, trust me, they do. I think that would kick in. I would hope that would. And then you do have this question about, well, what does happen? I think Trump, like I said before, I think he'll ignore it. And the question is, how many people does he have in an agency who are going to side with him over the courts? And that was what Project 2025 was all about, which, for all of his saying he had no idea what it was on the campaign trail, never heard of it, he seems to be enacting it really, really fast right now. For a guy who had no idea what it was. And that's the point, is if he has loyalists in there, they might just say, well, we're siding with the president and over the court. Now, if we have...
But I still come back to that question, like a court order, how would that be enforced normally? Court says, do X. They're not going to send out a bailiff. Do they empower the DOJ? I don't know how that works. I just don't know that answer.
No, normally the DOJ, because think about it. In a normal situation, the DOJ is independent of the White House.
Right.
They are. So, interesting story. So about a week after the election, I was at a presentation that had 3 different White House counsel, former White House counsel who were presenting. One from the Obama days. You had Don McGahn from Trump, Alberto Gonzalez, and they all they couldn't even fathom a DOJ that simply did the bidding of a president. Like, it wasn't a question that they wanted to even address. Like, they kept on going back and telling the audience, well, this is how it works. It just works this way. They're independent, and so we can't direct what they do. We've obviously seen that is not the new normal. That is not what Trump is demanding of his DOJ. So typically the courts the DOJ would go in and they would say, okay, the court has spoken. This is what we're doing. You have to do this. They would give directives to the agencies. The agencies would follow it. Typically, your career civil servants, they do what the courts tell them to do. They say, hey, look,
sure,
the court has spoken. We have to do what the court says. That's your typical under any prior administration. What would happen? That's the question here. Is we've never had this.
So, can I ask
Rick, let me just say, this University of Alabama thing. It's one of the great. There's always unintended consequences when stuff like this happens that they haven't thought through, right? So it's the state universities, University of Mississippi, University of Alabama, University of Florida, that are going to be gutted by these. And so who's going to survive? Harvard, which has an endowment, larger than the Irish budget. It's going to be these elite colleges that they're going to have empowered. The ones that they all hate. Yale. I think Yale is hurting for money.
The centers of wokeism. According to that.
Williams, Middlebury. These are the places that will flourish because they're the richest schools.
Sure.
Well, yeah. And
the red states are the ones that are going to be the most hurt across the board because they're the most dependent on federal funds.
So can I ask, Mario, 2 questions? One, which of these cases is likely to move through appeals and get to the Supreme Court first? If you're watching all this, do you have any idea about that? And secondly, which case would you want to get to would we have the best shot in your view with this court? I don't know. Maybe these are too early to ask either of those. But
I think no. I have an opinion on it, and I think the answer is the same one. I think it's the birthright citizenship. I think that will move very quickly because it's a pure issue of law. There's not with the funding freeze, you've got all these questions about, hey, are we talking about how much does it affect? And we have to do some fact finding. We have to get information. With the citizen birthright, it's just does the 14th Amendment mean what it says it means or not? Interesting question, since the Supreme Court ruled against us in our 14th Amendment question, but I'm not bitter. But we have a Reagan appointee who has basically said, look, this is the easiest case I've had in 40 years when he said it. And furthermore, he questioned the DOJ lawyers for getting up and arguing that it was wrong. Like he said, he almost said you are unethical to argue this. So I think it's a very clear. It's purely law, so it'll move very quickly. And it's the kind of thing that will jump right to the Supreme Court, and they can wrap their arms around because it is a very narrow scope. And I think for them, it should be easy, especially if you're originalists and you're textualists. So all the
Right.
conservatives on the court, they just need to read what it says and say, oh, hey, guess what? It says if you're born here, you're a citizen. But that's the interesting thing is what happens when they read it that way and Trump says, I'm going to ignore that.
Now, in the political sense, the whole birthright citizenship thing kind of puzzles me. I don't think that there's a great outcry against, the fact that J.D. Vance's wife is a citizen. Are people really mad about that? Her parents weren't legal U.S. citizens when she was born. Are they mad about Donald Trump's mother? Well, they probably are for other reasons. But I don't see that it has people really don't know what it is. I don't see it having a great emotional appeal. It's part of a general anti-immigrant thing, but I don't know. It's so Steve Jobs would have been illegal, so we wouldn't have had to suffer through Apple being, an American company. I could, from part of that reason is I can see that makes it easier for the Supreme Court to rule against it because there's not going to
only 29% of Americans say that we should follow Trump's lead on birthright citizenship.
Yeah, and probably
which is
95%
probably
of those
higher than that. That poll was from the end of December, so
and probably most of those people don't know what it is.
Correct. I also think there's a degree of they are racing to do as much damage as they can. Like tonight, I saw another piece of survey where that the Gulf of Mexico, 68% of people said no, don't name it the Gulf of Mexico. I think there's a lot of this that they know they have a runway here, and I don't mean to be like a ray of sunshine because y'all know I'm not a ray of sunshine. I think they've got a runway here. They know is gonna eventually peter out with a tolerance even for this Congress, especially when all this money stops going home to their districts. It's just not that. There's a point where it's like I don't want to cross Trump. Then it's going to be like, boss, this is going to open my seat up to make it vulnerable. And the minute they start thinking in those terms, as Joe was pointing out, if it gets into the 26 window and they're thinking those thoughts, it's going to be very tough, I think, to sustain this brick wall of pure Trump support.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I can tell you right now, in Colorado, we have one of the top House races in Colorado District 8. And Democrat jumped in, a guy named Manny Rutinel, and he raised $400,000 in one day. And 4,000 donors, and that's against Representative Gabe Evans. Gabe Evans has towed the entire Trump line the whole way, so like he's setting himself up. But like to Joe's point, if he doesn't tack back into before the 2026 election, there's no way he holds that seat. He won that seat by like a half a point over the Democratic incumbent who had originally won that seat by a half a point. So, like to Joe's point, if he goes along the whole Trump way, he's not going to hold that office. Furthermore, it has a very large Latino base in that district. So some of this stuff cuts really badly up there.
Well, Don Bacon out there is in Nebraska is apparently extremely nervous. He's apparently beating the White House door down in private, begging them to restore all this ag research funding. Nick LaLota up in New York, who defeated John Avalon in that race in New York, is apparently telling people, I really want the SALT deduction, but the president is stiff-arming me, and we're not going to get it. I think there are a lot of things both in the short term of the craziness we're going through now and then in the Elon Musk tax cut that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Once they finish this moment of chaos and Congress takes on that tax bill, I think all hell is going to break loose in this country. And the financial markets, smart financial markets guy said to me today, don't think that you're going to get a lot more of these tariff days where the market sort of shakes it off or laughs it off, because it will start to hurt now. And when we end up getting a treasury auction that on the 10-year, that doesn't happen and doesn't go right because China doesn't buy our bonds that day, the market is going to take a massive turn, and it's not going to help these Republicans in the House or the Senate.
Mario, let me ask you something. Can you talk about the state front on this, the state attorney generals? What do you think is going to happen there? And if they bring charges against Elon Musk and these kids that are working for Musk, the data that they have is data that citizens of every state, so any state could bring it.
Right.
Is it crazy to think that? I mean, you could have a scenario where they at least subpoena Elon Musk or subpoena these kids in a state, they defy it, and they put them in contempt and issue arrest warrants for them. How's this going to play out? Do the states really have power here, the attorney generals?
Yeah, I mean, I think the attorney generals do. I think what you're looking at is, the attorney generals are always kind of a little bit cautious by nature, but as soon as one goes, the rest will follow, or at least from one side. The unfortunate thing is we'll see is it'll turn into a red state versus blue state fight.
Right.
Which, the truth is Donald Trump is hurting people in all states. And his policies are hurting people in all states. But it'll kind of turn into that. But I think that they absolutely do. I think that if they try to subpoena them and they deny the subpoena, they refuse to show up. If I were Elon Musk, I might not show back up in California anymore. Because that is not under Donald Trump's jurisdiction.
And he can't pardon
the state police, the law enforcement there are not his to command, and so are probably, if they found Elon Musk there and they said, "Hey, look, you're in contempt. We've got a warrant for you for contempt." Yeah, sure, it could be problematic for him, or in New York for that matter. Which I think as far as I knew, some of Doge was actually operating out of New York. So absolutely, it could be a problem for them there.
I think one other question, and somebody sent me a note while we were doing this, that was asked of me a minute ago. Is there any prospect still for Trump to be able to get his New York charges overturned based on the Supreme Court's immunity decision? Do you think there's any argument to be made that we're going to end up having even that fall by the wayside of that state level decision?
No, I think that's pretty tough because it's a state level decision. B, because the immunity decision for all of its failings, at least it noted that you have to be doing it as part of your office. And the issue is most of this fell outside of his
happened before. Yeah, right.
So it was not. It wouldn't be considered official business. So I mean, I think, is there a possibility? Sure, there always is, but I think it's actually pretty minimal. I think those will stick with him. I think he will remain president 34.
Right. So, folks, listen, it is going to be a long week. You're going to tomorrow. They've delayed the Tulsi Gabbard vote that was up for this evening. That's delayed till tomorrow. You're about to see Tulsi and RFK, two of the most spectacularly dangerous and unqualified candidates to ever be up for any cabinet or federal position that I can imagine. It is going to be. It's making them nervous right now because there's a big snowstorm, big blizzard going on in D.C., and they don't have the votes to push Tulsi tonight. They don't have the votes to overcome to get cloture on it. They're waiting to try to do that. But folks, we are going to have another discussion with you guys again next Tuesday here on the strategy session. Look, one of the things we're trying to do with folks is to talk through and walk through the biggest problems of the day. We're trying to stay off of the Gulf of America BS stuff. If you saw our chief of staff at Lincoln, Ryan Wiggins' video today, go watch it. But it's like about staying off the BS stuff and staying on the big stuff. And this constitutional question of the separation of powers is the big stuff. Mm-hmm. As always, folks, we appreciate you watching, appreciate you sharing. Mario, thank you for coming on the show tonight. Joe and Stuart, as always, want to thank Stuart in his magnificent sweatshirt and Joe in his magnificent beard. We're happy to always have these conversations. And guys, it lets you have a little thing behind the curtain because we have these conversations all day long in chats and signals and phone calls and Zooms and everything else. But we honestly and truly believe that the more you're talking to your congressman right now, even if you're in a red district, call them, be polite, don't be threatening, don't get loud, just be very, very, very direct. The 5 Calls app is terrific. It's up on the screen right now. But call them and tell them, hey, I live in X. Please don't cut the funding to our university. I live in Y. Please don't cut our infrastructure funding for the new road. All those things will eventually start to add up. When the members of Congress are going to Mike Johnson saying, oh, man, I got 300 phone calls last week. I got 7 emails every minute of the day. I got 16 letters about this. Those things do start to add up in the minds of these members of Congress. And at some point, guys, the things that can't be sustained eventually end. The show you're watching cannot be sustained. It's bad. It's dangerous. It's very, very wrong. It's illegal. It's crappy, but it cannot be sustained over time. So here at Resolute, we're going to keep pushing hard on this stuff, letting you guys know, and trying to equip you with some insight on how to fight this thing. You can, by the way, if you can like and share the content, that makes a huge difference. Do me a favor, follow Joe Trippy, Mario, and Stu, and me on our Blue Sky list, the starter pack for Lincoln Project. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, the rickwilson.bsky.social. Listen, guys, Stuart, Resolute Square, we're all on Blue Sky now. We're still on Twitter. I like to just go on Twitter every day and roll a grenade in the room and leave. But you can listen to me on the Enemies of This podcast, the Lincoln Project podcast, the Elephant in the Room every Friday, Joe and the Trippy Show, amazing. Stuart, the man without a podcast, he's ducking a podcast, but it is what it is. And Mario is also ducking a podcast, but we'll get to you all eventually. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you again next Tuesday. Keep the faith. Keep up the fight.
Thanks, Mario.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mario.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Hey, thanks, guys.